We're live. Move that in just a little bit. Oh, take my jacket off. Pretty warm. It's nice out today. Got some. Today we're going to take a look at a couple things. One, the video that I just posted up today, which is power adder stuff, and more importantly, inexpensive eBay turbos. Twin turbos on a big block Chevy, but also we didn't just stop at running two inexpensive DNA GT35 turbos, GT45 turbos on a big block Chevy. We also ran a number of other tests. NITROUS on a junkyard 454 with no other changes, but carbureted. NITROUS on a 496, a modified 496 that was already fairly healthy. Just what I wanted to illustrate there was to people that seem to think that NITROUS wants specific camshafts or specific cylinder heads or specific carburetors or whatever their thing is. I wanted to show them that NITROUS does what NITROUS does regardless of the combination. You have the combination and then you add this much NITROUS to it. That's what it's going to add. It's going to do that on a 500 horsepower motor, on a 600 or a 700, whatever you're starting out with, the NITROUS just adds to that. And then we also added a 671 supercharger to a 540-inch blueprint engine motor. And again, we just showed different boost levels, what happens when we add power. I think we were pushing the 671, reasonably hard with that motor, even though it only made like less than 650 horsepower NA. It's still a good starting point. And also it's a big motor, 540 inches. So it can use basically all of what that blower shop 671, even though it was a good one. I think that was a stripped one. So that was a good blower. It was non-intercooled. And I didn't run E85 on it, which I wish I would have, because had I run E85 on it, we probably would have been a lot closer to the 1,000 horsepower number. And then I would have pushed it a little bit to get 4 digits because it would have been cool to get 4 digits with that 671 because we don't do that very often. So that would have been cool. But then the big thing, well, not the big thing, they're all good tests, but running two of those inexpensive turbos, which I bought one of them for $163. The other one actually was given to me. So in a sense, I got two of them for $163, but they're very inexpensive, even if you paid, because they're available at a bunch of different places. So you can buy them for 200 or 210 or 20 or whatever the number is. You can buy them a lot of places. And the cool thing is that I ran in another test, we ran a single one of those turbos on the 454, which is just way too small for that application because it's about a 700 or 750 horsepower turbo, more like a 700 on the bigger motor, because you run into too much exhaust back pressure on that application. That motor is just too big for that turbo. It works much better on a smaller motor, but two of them work very good. So two of them, now you have the ability to go to 1,400 or maybe even a little more if you turn them all the way up and make some fairly serious power on a 454. And that's what we ran them on. You could run them on other things too. A 496 or 540 or whatever you want to run them on. Those turbos, like I said, have enough to go well into the 4-digit range, mid 4-digit range. We only went to less than 1,100 horsepower, but that was at a fairly reasonable boost level because it wasn't even a terribly powerful combination to begin with. But it shows that they obviously work very well, and it's still kind of cool that for so little money in terms of turbos, you can make a lot of power. Now, obviously, there are other things that go along with that. We had our big 2-in single-out air-to-water intercooler, dual cores from the guys at CX Racing. We obviously had a pair of Turbo Smart wastegates on it. We had their blow-off valve. Got lots of aluminum tubing. There's a lot going on there. And we even, excuse me, on that one, we even had dedicated tubular turbo exhaust manifolds or headers built by Jason over JT Fab. So we made some dedicated tubular manifolds. And I like those, not thinking so much for flow, but that definitely helps. But also that because of the way that they were configured, they were a lot like the NA headers that we run, meaning that we have plenty of room for spark plug wires and access to the plugs and stuff, which is important for turbo stuff. Because the last thing I don't like, it's one of the reasons I don't like the kits for the LS stuff that we had for the tubular manifolds that guys buy on eBay, because they just burn plug wires and they're just, even though, yeah, ultimately, let's say that they make more power at a really, really high level, whatever that is. I just wouldn't want to use them just because of that. Even if they make more power, just because they burn plug wires and stuff. I'd want a different setup that would give me equal power, but also spark plug access and not burning the plug wires, because that would be the real pain, is if you burn plug wires all the time and you're constantly have to redo that. You know, you're making a run, you burn a plug wire, you get a hole that goes down, it's going to upset the situation. It's not going to want to make power if you're only burning 7 holes and try to run the turbo on it. More so than if you have a single turbo going to it, it's going to throw everything off. It's just not going to be happy if you lose a hole. So I don't like that. So these big block ones were nice that Jason did. And we were feeding 2 of the GT45 turbos. We had 2 45mm gates. We had the single dual core intercooler feeding, you know, one. We had a Victor Jr. intake manifold with an elbow on it. And I know everybody wants to know, yeah, what does the elbow do anything? No, I've run tests of the elbow and a single throttle body, single blade throttle body versus a 4-hole throttle body. And I don't know what the ultimate flow rate was of those 2 things, but one of them really didn't work better than the other, at least on the test that I ran it on. So, and again, it's never an ultimate test. It's never the end of the discussion. But had I seen something dramatic, oh yeah, the elbow directs air and, you know, makes lots of power, or the 4-hole has equal airflow distribution, or whatever the thing is. If I would have saw 20 horsepower one way or the other, then I would tell you, hey, look, I probably would recommend that. But since we didn't see anything at all, no change in power at all, that leads me to believe that certainly at the power level that we were testing it at, there's just really no change. Both of them work. And probably more likely that what you use to get the air in has much less of an effect, and we've seen this on a lot of applications, has much less of an effect than the intake manifold after that, because you're blowing all the air in. Then the intake manifold is going to dictate runner length and power production and a lot of things. The valve that you use to control the amount of air that goes in, because once you open the valve all the way, and we have pressure from the turbos or from a centrifugal blower or anything else, that throttle body and that elbow and stuff, there's very, very little, if any, restriction at all, especially at this power level and these sizes that we're talking about. So I don't really think you have to worry about that. Our 4150,000 CFM throttle body flowed more than enough, just like the single big. I think we used it, and it was really, really nice because it was done by Keith Wilson. It was a, you know, double wazoo billet, double throwdown kind of thing. And it looks really nice. But again, it's as nice as it looks. And if you were building a motor that you wanted to show off and you were running drag week and you wanted the best of everything, that's the one I would pick. It's just that at the level that we were at, it wasn't really a concern for power production so much. But it did work. $3 Chuck. Yes, $3 Truck definitely does make turbos. So the entry into the motor, not nearly as much of a problem, especially under boost. We can, you know, look how much power we've made with stock throttle bodies on LS motors. I'm certain that you could make 1,500 horsepower with a stock throttle body and a truck manifold. Somebody's probably already done it. So people like to think that that becomes a restriction, but it's not, especially under pressure, because the amount, like a 78 or 80 millimeter throttle opening, you know, that's about a 3-inch tube, let's say. How much airflow do you think a 3-inch tube will flow at 10, 20, 30, 40 pounds of boost? It'll flow a lot. So that doesn't become a restriction like a lot of people think. The cool thing is that the one that I like the most, for me personally, the twin turbos was cool, and it always is cool to run 2 turbos, especially 2 inexpensive ones. And it's amazing to see how much power they could make. And the reason that we didn't turn it up, and I'm going to do a video on this because that was actually the Big Bang motor. And the reason, and we'll go over all of this in the video, is that I didn't want to, the reason I haven't done the Big Bang yet is because I can't get that motor to make power out at 64, 6,500 like I wanted to. And I thought that we would do that with that custom cam, but it's just not doing that. Right now, it's making as much torque as it makes horsepower. Now, we can cure a little bit of that with having the boost controller be RPM referenced, which we didn't do on these tests. But you can see the thing has like a billiard table flat torque curve. Unfortunately, we're only making 1,000 horsepower, but the torque curve is also over 1,000 foot-pounds. And not just for a little bit, it's over 1,000 foot-pounds for a long way. And that's not what you want when you're doing a Big Bang motor. So we want to I have to change things around to get this thing I want this thing to make peak power at 63 or 6400 anyway, and I want to get it to make more peak power than torque. And again, like I said, we can do that a little bit with referencing the boost controller to RPM, so that we only have it make 7 pounds down low and then all of the boost at the very top. If it will indeed do that and we have that kind of dynamic range, I suspect what's going to happen is it's going to be like, if we need to run, let's say we need to run 30 pounds. If we need to run 30 pounds on the top, I don't think it's going to allow us to run 7 pounds at the bottom. I think it's going to be from 20 to 30 or something like that. And again, that's the reason that we want to adjust the NA power curve and not just the boosted power curve, or rely on our controllers to be able to do that. Now, I could do that a little bit by having basically a leak in the exhaust manifold and having the thing not come up. We could also step up to fairly big turbos, which we did. We're not going to use the GT45s for the Big Bang deal. We're going to use the S475s. So that should help things a little bit. But we've even tried those, and a similar thing happens. It makes a gigantic amount of torque and horsepower. And since it's doing that at, it's making peak power at like 5,500 RPM. That's not where we want peak power. We want to push peak power out farther than that. So we'll go over all that in the video on why I haven't done the Big Bang Big Block yet, and things that I think that I need to change. And I thought that doing the custom cam, and again, we'll go over the specs on the custom cam and all that, but it hasn't worked yet. And the motor's just been sitting for quite a while now. It needs to run, and I need to do the big block thing, but I want to give the big block thing a fair shake, because I'd like the big block to dethrone the LS and then push me to do another LS, so that we got to do something and make more power. Because we know that the 6-liter, we weren't at the limit of that one, and that it can keep going and make more power. Even if it's just 1 more pound, whatever the next thing is, it has the potential to make more power than it did. We know that because it went up so easily before. And especially if I go a little bit more conservative, I think I will go a little bit more conservative on the timing, probably at higher boost levels. Because I haven't ever gone more than 30 pounds on anything. That's as much as I ran on the Honda when I did that. That's as much as I ran on the Big Bang deal, and I haven't gone beyond that. So Chevy 632 single turbo question. Is it the 630? Is it the 1,000 horsepower 632 crate motor? What's the power output of the 632 with the single turbo that you want to run? That will kind of help me steer you in the right direction. Mad Adventure, we don't have problems with any of even the junkyard motors, and they're just the factory trigger wheels are welded, but I take that back. I don't even think they're welded. I think that they're pressed, and we haven't had any problems with any of those. A lot of guys that are racing, especially guys that were road racing, I know the Daytona guys were welding the crank triggers onto the cranks. We haven't ever done that. The sensor gap, there's actually a little bit of range there. If you take a look at what we did with the, because I didn't even measure it, I just thought, okay, that looks close enough, which that's plenty, right? That's perfectly scientific. So if you look at the 2.2 liter turbo that I did, the 2.2 liter Dodge turbo motor, where I used the crank sensor for the reluctor pickup on the distributor, we just stuck it in there near it. So I didn't measure it at 5 thousandths or 10 thousandths or whatever the number was. Tim, I kind of agree. I think that 6.6 liter L8T has a lot of potential. Why would one increase rocker ratio instead of increasing the camshaft? I like to do it with the camshaft and not with rocker ratio. Jay, if you want to make a 500 or 600 horsepower 4.8 liter, that's really easy. That's a cam, any kind of small stage 1 truck cam, and a little bit of boost in a 4.8, and you're at 500 or 600 horsepower. It's not going to take very much. And either a single or twin turbos, and it's not a larger single for 600 horsepower. That's like a GT35 or a single GT45 or an S366. It's going to be a fairly small turbo that's going to make 600 horsepower. Most of that is packaging. If you can fit a single turbo, most guys can fit a single turbo in there. Lots of turbo LS stuff out there, so you should be easily able to fit a single turbo in it. A quad turbo, that's even better, right? Yeah, Dan, that would be one instance where you would want to run more rocker ratio if you just can't physically put the can't put any more lobe in it because of the size of the cam tunnel. Oh, so you want a perfect turbo for 1,000 horsepower crate motor? I just don't know what 10 psi on a 1,000 horsepower crate motor is going to be like 16 to 1,700 horsepower. Uh, 96 400 V12 swap. Okay, V8 is not too good going up Everest. So where do people drive on Mount Everest? Russell, LS or Ford Windsor, 350, 400 inches. Either of those will work. The Windsor, there's lots of potential there. I use a 351, stroke it to 392 or a 408, and there's lots of good heads for them, and you can make good power. You've run everything on the Gen 544 except the standard T6 132. I'm willing to bet the T6 with a big air will flow enough to keep the back pressure at 1.5 to 1. I think that's probably accurate. An S475 on the big block should go up to 900 or 950 or something like that, I would think. Regarding back pressure, if you have a 750 horsepower turbo on a big block, at what point does back pressure become an issue? Well, it became an issue right away. It becomes an issue almost immediately, like with a GT45, which is about a 700 or 750 horsepower turbo and we've made as much as 800 on a small displacement motor. But on the big motor, immediately, because it has a lot more exhaust flow and a lot more displacement, the back pressure, even at the load-in point of, let's say that you did it at 3,000 RPM, the back pressure is already going to be way higher than it is on a 4.8. And I have that video up. If you can look at the comparison, I show you a comparison of back pressure on both of those motors. So it's higher to begin with and much higher at the end because it climbs at a much steeper rate on the big motor. And I think we got up near 3 to 1 on the single GT45. Twin turbo LT6 C8 Corvette Z06. Okay. Advice on boosting a 2000 4.7 liter Durango. It just depends on the turbo doesn't care about what the motor is. You just have to pick the turbo based on whatever power you want. So if you're starting out with, I don't know what that 4.7 makes. Let's say it makes 300 horsepower. It probably doesn't. It probably makes 250. If you're starting out with that and you want to make 500, you need to have a 500 horsepower turbo capable of working on that size displacement, which again, always err on the GT45 side because it's so inexpensive. Dan, how did he get a helicopter to work at 26,000 feet. Johnny, there's other ways to increase torque, but not dramatically at low speed. Like if you're talking about 2,000 RPM, you can do it with runner length. You can do it with displacement. You can do it with compression. You can do it a little. You can't really do it with cam timing. You can do it a little bit with. You can do it with cam timing with variable cam timing, and you can also do it a little bit with like header length. The GT45 is a good starter turbo in the 700 horsepower and less range. If I swapped it on 360 for 318 with my ECU, I think your ECU probably will know that because it under cruise, under closed loop, it will probably compensate, assuming I don't know anything about the Dodge parameters in the factory ECU. If it has enough adjustability in closed loop to add the required amount of fuel, but I don't think it will be perfect. I think you'd have to tune it for that big of a change. I haven't had any reliability issues with the GT45 that I've run. Noodles, I remember reading that fact on the tires. They're rated for 15 minutes at a sustained 300 miles an hour. They wanted to make sure that the thing was safe. However, the fuel tank empties in 12 minutes. That's what a lot of guys don't realize. I remember I was having a conversation in the garage, standing around a Trans Am like you do. And we were talking about the Silver State because I had run a couple of Silver States in the Mustang. And I'm like, yeah, we ran the Silver State and we averaged 100 and this is when we were first starting 141 to 147 miles an hour or whatever the average was. I was like, oh, man, this car right here, I averaged 160 from, and he was saying from like somewhere ridiculous, like from Phoenix to Palm Springs or something. And I'm like, you know, I'm doing the math on that. And given the tank, first of all, I know that this car won't do that. I doubt that this car will go that fast. And I know that you're not a good enough driver to do that because I know what the road is in between there. It's not just an open freeway like we got to ride on when we ran the race that was closed and safe. So you're driving through people and traffic and highway patrol. So I already know that that's a lie. But I'm like, not just because of that, but look at your fuel tank. So you're saying you averaged 160 miles an hour, which means that you were going way faster than that at some time. And also you had to stop and get gas unless you did in-flight refueling. Oh, you guys don't know. I'm like, no, I know. And I also know that this was the same guy that told me he doesn't wear seatbelts because he trusts his reflexes more than the seatbelt. I'm like, okay, well, that's really as much as I need to hear in this conversation because obviously I'm not going to be able to convince you with anything like data or reason. That's not going to go very well. 235 horsepower. Nice. So we'll see. You can that. The thing is, the nice thing about not making very much power is there's nowhere to go but up. How long will a stock 5.7 last? A 2010 5.7. So is that a Hemi you're talking about? Because they didn't make LS 5.7s in 2010. I'm assuming that it's a Hemi. You're gonna have to do some things to it to make it last at 1,000 horsepower. You have to do it. You're gonna have to do something to the ring gap and head studs and tune and all that. Would maybe twin T6 flange turbo setup with 80 millimeter turbo solve the back pressure problem? Well, the twin GT45s already solve the back pressure problem on the big blocks. We have twin S475s, which solves it even more. And those are T4s because still that's the back pressure is fine with those two T4s because that's almost 2,000 horsepower with a turbo. And we're not going to get anywhere near that with the big block. So you want the Silver State Omni runs? That would be interesting. That'd be interesting to see if that turbo motors, unless they're factory ones, don't. I remember a guy don't do typically don't do very well at the Silver State. You have to be really good at heat management. I remember a guy trying to run a turbo RX-7. This was a Turbo 2 version, and trying to run that at the Silver State, and he cooked it pretty hard. Richard, does this guy drive? What guy are you talking about? D-Train. I'd like to see the difference between a ball bearing and a journal bearing turbo. Some people have told me about response rate and stuff, and maybe longevity, but again, I've never seen any definitive testing there. Yeah, if you've melted pistons in it, that's a tune problem. It's not a strength issue in the motor design in a Hemi, and that's not uncommon that people don't have the right tune in a Hemi. A lot of guys didn't have software for them, and also you definitely need ring gap in a Hemi. Dan, how many miles is that? So what's the average speed there? In a 930, that's 3 hours and 45 minutes of power. Would you go through more than 27 gallons of gas? I think you would. So did you have to stop? Mackenzie, yeah, you can be a tooth off. It's not, and if you have too much timing, usually it breaks. So you're lucky. What turbo would you recommend for 11.5 to 1 544 valve? How much power do you want to make? It's all the same. It doesn't care about what your combination is. You got to tell me what kind of power you want to make. Yeah, you definitely have to have a big. I always ran an oil cooler on my Mustang when I was running the Silver State. We haven't even ran a separate one for the oil going into the blower, although I think that was more just making me feel better. Casey, we've talked about that. I actually talked to Freiberger about doing a gap test to find out how far you have to go before it starts actually hurting power. On a Hemi, you're gonna want the same thing that we run in everything else, which is about 7 thousandths per inch of bore. So it's a 4-inch bore. You're gonna need 28 to 30 thousandths depending on how much boost you run. Richard, what's your opinion on gapping both top and bottom rings for 24 for boost applications? We always gap both of the rings, the top and the bottom. You have to do that, otherwise they're going to break. And 24, it depends on the bore size. We usually go bigger than that if we're going to run a lot of boost. 24 on a 3-inch bore or 3.25-inch bore, or maybe even a 3.5-inch bore probably would be enough. AJ, I actually am not a Scotch guy. Most of my stuff is raspberry lemon drops, which I've told many, many times it is the manliest of all the lemon drop family. So that's why I choose that. Rum and Coke, Jack and Coke, Crown and Coke. I think maybe I just like the soda maybe more than anything. I'd like to see journal versus ceramic bearing. Yeah, Snafu, I think that's an awful lot like doing oil tests, where longevity oil tests, like if you change your oil every 3,000 miles or whatever the service interval is, and you continue to have clean oil in there, I mean, how are you going to tell a difference in what's going on, since most of the, I think they've shown that most of the damage to motors is on startup anyway. Although I don't think that when they do that kind of research, they do it with like our kind of people. I don't think they say, okay, well, here's what you need to do. You need to put a supercharger on your Mustang. No, don't have a standalone management system. Just have an FMU and a big mass air and injectors. And then what we want you to do is drive it around every day, and then drive it out to Nevada, the middle of Nevada, and go as fast as you can for as long as you can, and then drive it home. I don't think the oil guys that do testing do it on those kinds of cars. Yeah, lazier turbo could help that, but then it might come on like more suddenly. Maybe a boost controller can help that, or a centrifugal blower. Yeah, Dan, that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize, is that having to stop for fuel is time consuming. Yeah, Crown and 7, that works too. Fascist, here's something that you'll realize once you grow up, that the drink doesn't make the man, that it's the other way around. Yeah, shots fired. Luckily for me, I know he can take it. I'd like to see a spool time is the benefit of the bearing time. See, I don't think that that's the case. I think that if you are going to wide open throttle and you have a turbo, the exhaust flow is the big thing that's going to determine response rate. I don't think that the lack of friction or the change in friction that might be, and I'm not even sure that it might be possible between a journal bearing and a ball bearing, because once there's oil there, nothing is touching. So I don't know that there's a great deal of frictional change there. It might be more of a longevity thing, in my opinion. I don't know that that's going to be the case. I think sometimes when people do bearing upgrades, sometimes they also do wheel upgrades and stuff, and that's obviously going to change stuff. With most of the 4.8 turbo builds where you're running stock injectors, you can't run stock injectors with a turbo. They're not nearly big enough. You have to run an injector size that's sized with a flow rate to feed the power output that you have. A stock injector is like a 21 or a 24 or something, and that's going to feed 400 horsepower. That's going to be 400 NA horsepower. So that's not anywhere near what you need for a turbo. Sweepers versus unbaffled pans. There's lots of cool stuff happening and I did a lot of this testing when I was doing Engine Master stuff. When you do oiling upgrades and when you start looking for things, there's actually lots of power to be had there. What's a good cam size for a nitrous setup with future turbos without wasting money on different cams? You don't have to waste money on different cams. Forget about the nitrous and the NA and the turbo. Pick a camshaft that's going to make power from your NA motor. Then all the other stuff that you do to it is just going to add on top of that. So pick the cam that's going to make the NA power output that you want. There's lots of good Hemi cams out there. The guys from Cam Motion have some stuff. I think Brian Tooley's working on stuff. I know Comp has. I've run some of their new LST cams in Hemis. I've got some videos up on the 5.7 stuff. Jay, you can go the inexpensive route when you're choosing injectors and decap them, but you have to flow them all after you do that. Because when you decap them, a lot of times they don't come out the same. They don't flow the same. We went through that doing a set of 36-pound Bosch injectors for a Honda, and we had to do it to 8 of them before we came out with 4 that all flowed the same. So if you just do it the same thing to all of them, they may not flow the same after you cut them off. How much power can be made? What's the max limit of Dash 8 fuel lines? Like a bajillion horsepower. Depends on what the fuel pressure is on that Dash 8 line. But we've done 1,000 horsepower with 5/16 factory fuel rails. So if that gives you any idea. I don't think ceramic's a marketing deal. I think that there's something there. I just don't know if it's the things that everybody is saying. Do you have problems with Edelbrock carbs on big block Chevys? I haven't run, honestly, a lot of Edelbrock carbs on big block Chevys. Normally when we run those, we reach for one of the Holley carburetors that are in the cabinet. And if it's a big block, unless it's a stock one where we would run a 650 or 750, it's almost always the 950 that we put on big block stuff. Mackenzie, that's a little bit of an art to get the HEI. I'm assuming that that's what it is. You've got to go in and put stops, or we've used rubber pieces of hose, all kinds of stuff. You got to disassemble the distributor and stop the amount of swing that it has. And there's various ways to do that. Kevin, that's cool. You create your own flow bench, and you can, because especially if all you're looking for is not an absolute number, if you're looking for similarities between all of them, if all you want is them to flow all the same, then that sort of thing can work really well. GT45 Turbo, I've seen one for $400 brand new. Is that too cheap for quality? No, the one that I bought was $163 and it was brand new. It wasn't used. So you can buy them cheaper than that. Dan, they make different bushings, but his is an HEI, I think, and not the bushings that they use in the MSD stuff, because that's what we do in the MSDs. The Power Blast plates. Those don't add any power. Surfside, the number of injectors isn't going to be better as long as if you had 4 versus 8, as long as the 4 flow enough and they're within their dynamic range, like they're not at 100% duty cycle, let's say, and maxed out in pressure that you can supply to them. So it's just a matter of how much power you want to make. If I had all the money in the world, those are my two choices: as a 2012 CTSV or a 06. If I had all the money in the world, I'm thinking big. I'm thinking that I'd get a twin turbo Lambo or something. Or actually, I think my ultimate car would not be that. I think it would be a McLaren F1. But I would want boost on mine. I would want 2 turbos on my McLaren, because I wouldn't want some guy in a Veyron be able to like roll me on a freeway or something. I would want the F1, which we know will out accelerate like a Bugatti, especially down low, which a lot of cars will, because that car is fairly heavy, but that thing charges hard, like on the big end. So I would want I like how small the McLaren is. Plus you have a single seat and then 2 seats for your supermodel friends, obviously, that you would have if you had a McLaren F1. But it's only like 650 or 670 horsepower, which is really good for how light it was. And it was the car, but it needs to have like more than 1,000 horsepower. And that would be fairly easy, I think, with that motor with a couple small turbos on it. You always hear lower compression on big boost, 30 pounds. Michael, it's not the boost and the compression are usually a function of a couple things. One is the biggest thing is octane. So if you don't have enough octane, it's a lot easier to combine higher boost with lower compression because it helps your tuning window. If you have 13.5 to 1, you have 30 pounds of boost, your tuning window is going to be like this. So you, if you have all the octane in the world, you can get away with that. And racers do that. If you're racing, they want all of it. They want all of the boost that they can run, all of the compression, all of the RPM, all of that stuff, because that's how you make more and more power. But for street cars, even street strip cars, or for a car that you're having to worry about octane, that's not a good combination. Matt, so you've got a 6-liter Trickflow 225s, fast 102, stage 4 cam. That's, you know what kind of power that's going to make. That's going to be like 575 or something, right? I do want to see the Buick 455. When the Buick 455 goes back together, it will go back as a stage 1 replica. Yeah, Kevin, if you flow them and they're the same, then I would use them. A 250 Dino Ferrari? No, that doesn't even make the list. A V6 Ferrari? Evan, we've actually tested those. What are my thoughts on the Z06? I think it's awesome. I think it's going to be a super powerful NA combination. Chris, that's why I do testing on all of this stuff so that you can pick the one that you want. There's no one answer for that. You can pick a blower, you pick turbos, nitrous, a roots blower, centrifugal, twin screw, all of that stuff. I don't know. Does anybody know if somebody has methanol carburetors for blow through stuff? A Porsche 919. There really are a lot of cool supercars now. I remember back in the day, it was just like the Ferrari Boxer was a turbo Porsche, but a Boxer was in a different level than the standard turbo Porsche was, and the Porsche was in a different level than the Ferrari 308. And then the Testarossas and the Lamborghinis and all that stuff started coming on, and then they started getting really serious about supercars. McLarens tend to bend rods when you turbocharge them. You have a lot of experience with turbocharged McLaren F1s. The Buick is definitely coming back. I'm definitely putting that back together. The Z06 is a flat plane crank. Definitely it is. A Bentley with a W12 engine. Nice. Yeah, I don't think McLaren would go to Nissan for a motor, right? I would think that would be an error. Lots of guys like that, Chris. Lots of guys like that blower surge, especially in boats. They like that. Yeah, Mackenzie, just take it apart and look in there and see how it's working and go, oh, okay, well, if I put a little rod here or a little bushing or a little piece of rubber or whatever it is, you know, get creative. So, Dan, you want the 919 and not the 918 because it's one more? Socrates, Richard, have you ever tried taking out a lot of timing at the nitrous hit, then giving it back so it softens the hit? I have not tried that. We normally just take out a universal chunk of timing if we're taking it out. Like we'll take out 4 degrees or 6 or 8 or 10 or whatever the number is, depending on how big a shot we're putting in. I've never tried ramping that in to see how that works. We have tried on EFI stuff on dry shots, adding a bunch of fuel in so that we don't get the initial lean spike, and that seems to work fairly well. But I've never tried the timing thing. The Dino is one of the most valuable. The Dino is not even close to the most valuable Ferrari. I mean, they're neat looking, and I know that they were named after his son and stuff. It's just a little, it's just not for me. It's not my thing. I would much rather have a 308, and I know that it's worth nothing. A 308 is worth nothing compared to a Dino, but I like the 308 better. And I like a lot of other Ferraris better. A Daytona Spider would be much higher on the list. Maybe even an Enzo would be, the actual Enzo would be higher on the list than a Dino would be. Goes to 11. You're part of the Z06 program? Well, fill us in. The only Porsche prototype would be a 962C. I've actually sat in those, and those are pretty cool. JCE Jellin? Ford GT40 with a Voodoo 5.2 with twin turbos. Okay. I like the Ford GT because I'm actually a previous Ford GT owner, but I like your second idea even better. The Lotus Elise with a K24 turbo. That I think is really cool. The 919 beat the 962 by a full minute. That's forever. I think you should do Yanko Nova clone. If I was going to do that, I'd have to start out with something that would be a lot different than the one that I have. Uh-oh, holes on the side of the block. That's not good. An F40 is also high on the list. Also, I think that those are cool, even though they're not tremendously powerful, but they're still really cool. And I've been in those, and I've ridden in those, and those are really cool. You can see all the like raw carbon fiber and the seam seal and all that stuff on it. It's like a real proper, supercar with all kinds of, issues. The Daytona 250 GTB sold for $35 million. Was it that sounds like a 250 GTO. Because the Daytona was a different car. Noodle, so don't get any LMP1 restrictions. That's one of the cool things about and I have the book on the McLaren F1. The cool thing is that you've made a real car when you introduce it to the racing series to run the car at Le Mans, and they have to detune your road car to make less power, which is awesome. Stock bottom end, ring gap 350 Big Bang. Yes, you need to put ring gap in them. K-swapping a 308. I like the little Lotuses. I almost bought an Elise. Do you know programs to do it yourself guy can purchase for tuning a 2014 Hemi Ram? Does anybody know what programming they have for 2014 Hemi? Yeah, the K-Swap NSX is very cool also. I have a buddy of mine, Jimmy, is putting a J series Honda in one of those, and I had an NSX in '91 with the turbo on it, and it was a fantastic car. It was fantastic even when it was NA. It just needed more power, but it was still, it's a, you know, it's like a Ferrari, except it's as reliable as a Civic. They're awesome. When did this turn into an exotic car chat? It always does. If you're a car guy, even if we drive Novas and Omni GLHs, or that you're not driving, that don't even run, we can still dream about cool cars. A 2004 JGC 4-liter. What is a JGC 4-liter? Porsche brought the unrestricted 919 to Laguna Seca. So did Porsche detune it so that they couldn't go fast in it? Yeah, Sabine was a good shoe. I remember watching the Transit van. Isn't that 919 faster than a Formula One car? Wallace, is the 7875 next gen too restrictive for an LQ4 with a T4 flange? What power level? That's like 1,000 horsepower turbo. It might not quite do 1,000 on the LQ4. It might. I've never run one all the way up, but I think that that's about where it's going to be. So if you want to make that kind of power, it will work. So it's a Jeep, and that's a supercar. Is it possible to safely run any amount? Not any amount of boost is safe. You can run boost through a blow-through carburetor. We've run lots. The issue that you have is not the carburetor. Usually it's the intake manifold that you have to run the carburetor on. I do like the Omni GLHs. I can't wait to get mine running. I've never played with a Volvo. We have owned a Volvo, an XC90 way back, but I never did anything to it. Yeah, she was awesome. An all-wheel drive Talon, those are also cool. Even the front-wheel drive ones were impressive little deals, and you could make a lot of power. I did a tune-up on a Volvo Penta in a boat. Nice. Those are very popular. The Conquest, I like the one with the flares on it. I owned I guess they call them flat side or slab side one. I wasn't hip on all the lingo. The I think you could argue that the all-wheel drive Eclipse was every bit as good as the Mazda 323 or the Celica All-Track, and did it for a lot less money. But those other two cars bring real money, though. I wanted to turbo my K20 EP3 Civic. I like the 4-cylinder turbo cars. So the Conquest had problems back in the day. I know guys were doing the same thing that they're doing the K24s, and they take the balance shafts out of them as one of the performance upgrades on those, because they're, you know, they're 2.4 liters. They're big. I think that no, 2.6 liters. They were even bigger than that. So they were taking the balance shafts out of them because, you know, that stopped those things from revving up there. If all are available. Let's see. If all were available and equal, which junkyard vehicles Pontiac 454 would you choose? I actually don't see. I've never seen. I have seen a Buick 455 in the wrecking yard, but I've never seen an Oldsmobile, and I've never seen a Pontiac. So I don't really have that choice over in the wrecking yards. Those older cars. Ooh, a Renault R5 Turbo, yes. Or I got to ride in a Ford RS 200, which would be really high on the list also. Actually, all of those rally cars, the Lancia Delta, an Audi Quattro, all of those would be really cool. I've never done anything with the Audi motors. I think that didn't the Quattro have a 5-cylinder in it? Vadim, the guy that owned the show shop, had one of those for a while, and I remember riding in it, and his was a turbo, and I remember how soft it was down low. It seemed like it was very low compression. They had VR4 Gallants too, yeah. A VR4 Gallant would be the equivalent of a what is the 4-door that Matt jacked the prices up on? The Fox chassis, the Fairmont, and the Granada. The Gallant was basically the equivalent of that. Sunbird turbos, I remember those. Also the Dodge Colt and Mitsubishi Mirage turbos, and the 626s. Yeah, the box flares, anything with box flares on it, like the IMSA, we call them IMSA flares because that's really super cool. Frank's Pontiac Salvage and 29 Palms. I'll have to check that out. The Ford Probe Turbo, when Ford, back when they had that Probe Turbo, they had that and the various versions of the T-Bird and the Mustang. They had a bunch of like 140 plus mile an hour cars. The little Mitsubishi was I had one. It was a Mirage. It was basically the Mitsubishi version of the Dodge Colt. And if you were really cool, you had the twin stick. The Japanese Maximum, the Kai class cars. Ooh, a Pulsar GTR, but we didn't get those, unfortunately. Two more minutes. It's Friday night. What are you guys doing here? Not the Mirage, the other one with the double overhead cam, 1.6 liter. What the heck was that? Mitsubishi, not a Galant. Anybody know? Nitrous or trans brake, both of those work. And if you combine them, yeah, the 3000 GT-VR4, that's a V6. I would suggest using a turbo RPM gauge. None of my turbos have a thing for that. Well, somebody look it up. And I never got to talk to you about my. I never see we go by this stuff too fast. I never talked about my the viewer comments. We'll have to do that next time. A Taurus EcoBoost, nice. I would like to have a Volvo turbo wagon. Dan, are you thinking of the Tredia and the Cordia, or are those the cars you're thinking of? Because those were little turbo motors also. Oh, way later than those. Okay. Sorry, man. I'm OG. Mazda Speed MX-5s. I like the turbo, the Mazda Speed 3s, I guess. So that'd be like a 323. Other guys. Richard doesn't want a Ferrari 250. A 250 GTO, actually, as much as I like a 250 GTO and I understand what it is and its significance and stuff, I like the Daytona Coupe better. After seeing it from the Gumball Rally movie, and I know that it's only, when everything is right, it's like a 300 horsepower motor, probably goes 160 or 170 miles an hour. And any sort of modern car is like way faster, but those things are nice. Injector size needed for 1,000 horsepower. It depends on what fuel you're going to run, but we use 80s if we're using gas, or 1,000 cc's or 1,500 cc's if you're going to run E85. I remember driving Mike just brought up the turbo diesel Benzes. I remember driving a turbo diesel. It might have been one of the first turbo cars that I drove way back. A buddy of mine had one, and he said, "Okay, just go to the store and you can take this car." And I took it, and I thought, "Oh, this is a turbo motor. This is gonna feel awesome." It did not. The Proteges, I had a friend of mine ran one of those in showroom stock, not a turbo version, the NA version. 63 Grand Prix, 421, tri-power, nice. Yeah, the Mercedes turbo diesel was not impressive. I'm sure it gets good mileage and all that, and we know that they last like forever, but that's because it doesn't make any power. A Firefly, yeah, that's the Chevy Sprint motor. That's the Canadian version, right? Yeah, Tom, our registration is very high. We just went to re-register my wife's car, and it was not fun. The Chevy Citation, the X11. Yeah, you can run those Mercedes diesels on everything. No, on the X Body cars. Come on, they ran those. They raced those. I think that the Chevy Citation guys had a factory team. I actually would love to have another Chevy Sprint. I actually wish my ideal combination, and I know that the thing that I don't like about them is they weigh a lot more, but the later version of the Geo Metro with a rounded body, it just looks sleeker and more aerodynamic. I would like the Chevy Sprint Turbo drivetrain transplanted into one of those, and that would be cool. But a Chevy Sprint Turbo would be awesome. Another one. A Renault Space F1. Yes. Of all of the vans that you could have, that certainly would be the coolest one. Today was 77, 78 degrees. It was beautiful today. 71 MG midget. Well, you need to put it's not quite as cool as a bug-eyed Sprite, but a turbo rotary in the MG midget is a good choice. And the 5-speed trans. A Spridget. I remember watching videos of the Renault Space F1 van that they did, which was awesome. If you guys don't know what that is, it's a Formula One car with a Renault Space basically van body on it, and they used to give people rides in it, and it's what an awesome idea. A Yugo would be good too. An SR20 GET square body S10. I like that engine, and I would really like to have. I'm a big fan of the Nissan Sentras, the early ones. An Iron Duke and an MG, that might almost be a step backwards. Ford 5.0, take a look at all the videos I have up. There's testing on cylinder heads and camshafts and intake manifolds and turbos and blowers and nitrous and anything that you would want to do to your 5-liter. There's lots of stuff up there. Does anybody know if in the TR8 will like a real V8 fit in there? Yeah, the early SER was an NA version. It was only 140 horsepower, so it was not even. I don't even think it was as fast as like a Civic Si or something. But I like them. I like them like I like the 510s. They did have the Buick V8s in them, but that's not like a real V8. I mean a real V8, like an L33 or something. The best swap ever is an Iron Duke and a TR7. I had, my first car was a 70.5 split bumper Camaro. And after I sold that, the two cars that I was looking at is one, I wanted a 240, 260, 280Z or a Triumph TR6. And I'm glad I got the Z because it was much more reliable and stuff. And it was awesome. But I did always want, and I think the reason that I had side draft Webers on them. And that's the other reason that I like the Z too, because I ended up having side draft Webers on the Z motor as well. And the Z was a much better car without the headache of Lucas Electronics and all that stuff. But I did like, and usually rust and stuff with those British cars. They had problems with that as well. And the Z was much faster and handled better and just did everything better basically. But I did like those. I know I haven't seen a Vega on the street in forever. What are your thoughts on the Holley dual plenum intake? I've tested it. I have videos up on it, so we know exactly what it does. Yeah, does anybody know what the power rating was of the 350 and the Monza? It could have been very much, right? Lots of Monzas out of the Nissan Pulsar too. That's good. Lots of Monzas out of Bonneville. I bought 97 GT40P heads. Those will work a lot better than the E7TE heads. So just put a little cam in it and put the Explorer intake on there and it will work good. .528i. I like the early 535 ISs. They're snarky, the square ones. I remember seeing there was a couple of those out of the Silver State because they brought an M5 and an M6 out, and both of those were awesome. I mean, they didn't make a lot of power, but they were both faster than my Mustang was. Oh, the slant 6 with Webers on it, that would be good. The C4 Corvette is an impressive performer. I mean, there were guys that when the Corvette, the C4 stuff was relatively new, like it was probably 89, 90 probably. There were guys that brought C4 Corvettes out, 84s and 85s, and all they did was make carbureted, performance small blocks out of them. And those cars were 200-mile-an-hour cars. So the car's very aerodynamic. It has a really good suspension. They had really good brakes. It did all kinds of things right. You could make a lot of power, obviously, with the small block Chevy. So any sort of aluminum-headed, roller cammed, stroker, whatever, you could make lots and lots of power. And it didn't take a lot of power to make that car go 200 miles an hour. 145 horsepower. The question I have about the C4 is, what about the trans on those? Is that a transaxle car? What transmission are they running in those? Slant 6. You want to slant 6 everything? C4, yeah, the 84 was a Crossfire. I know if you have too big of a carburetor, you can choke out your engine. Yeah, what happens is you don't get enough fuel to it when you have too big of a carburetor. It's possible to do that with a big throttle body. No, it's not. On fuel-injected motors, the signal doesn't determine how much fuel you're flowing. like it does with the carburetor. You determine that by the fuel injection unit, by the programming. I have not run a Godzilla motor. C4 is a regular conventional trans. Okay. You ever do anything with a W20 MR2? I'm not sure which one that is. I actually owned an MR2. I had an 86, bought it new, and I loved it. I thought it was an awesome car. It's how I learned about oversteer and stuff. It, particularly lift throttle oversteer. So let's see. I'm not a fan of the C5s. I don't like the way that the back end looks. I do like the C6s, but I like a C4 better than I like a C5. I like the motor that's in the C5, but the C6 body I like better. I like a C6 more than I like the C7. So I'm alternating years basically. So the 75 California emissions equipped Monza had 125 horsepower, 350. Wow. They really went after it. I remember the Doug Nash 4+3 stuff. And didn't the was the automatic a 700? Cadillac and an LH2 LC3. Which motor is that? Yeah, Lee, we've talked about the 632. Yeah, the big leaf springs. My buddy had one, and they put. I actually had an 85 that we did suspension on, and I want to say that we did. I think that they're also like fiberglass leaf springs or some sort of composite leaf spring. Yeah, and they were the same front and back, right? Not the same, but they had the same kind of spring on them. Uh, 316, happy birthday. 40 and still there, huh? Man, you're getting up there. Monoleaf. I remember the Z51 stuff and how all of the engineers love that, and then it rode terrible, but it was fast around the track. And then they softened them up in subsequent years. Because those had gator backs on them, 50 series, 16-inch gator backs. Yeah, you can get a shackle kit, or you can get the little the thinner isolators between the leaf and the body too, and then put the cool like Bilstein shocks on it. Put some roller bearing control arms. Torsion bars. A lot of the A lot of the Dodge stuff uses torsion bars. Okay, guys, I got to get going. Thank you all. Friday night. Thank you guys all for showing up. If you have not already, take a look at the big block video that's up. Probably LS or modular or something's coming next. You know, there's no shortage of dyno stuff. But I got to get down to West Tech before too long here and get some more testing done. Hopefully do the 4200 and then run the Magnum as well, I think. I don't know if the Dodge 2.2 is going to be ready on this next trip, but we'll have to see. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will see you all tomorrow.